I've spent the last month putting Relevance AI through its paces, testing every feature and pushing the platform to its limits. I've built a AI travel agent, a coach, a multi-agent system around financial advice, which didn't work very well, and I'll explain why a bit later. But in this Relevance AI review, we're going to be covering a lot of ground. First, we'll walk through the platform and its main features, from tools and subagents to the flow builder and core instructions. We'll also take a look at integrations, deployment options, and the LLM models that are available. In part 2, we'll walk through 2 real examples of building an agent so you can see everything in context and fast track your knowledge of the platform. And lastly, we'll talk about the pricing, the limitations of Relevance AI, how it compares, and when you might want to choose an alternative AI agent platform. But first though, what is Relevance AI? In short, it's a no-code platform for building AI agents. And what differentiates it from the hundreds of other agent tools out there like LangChain, BotPress, AutoGen, Flowise, etc., is that it's really easy to build multi-agent teams without code. Put another way, what would take me weeks to build using an agent framework, I can prototype within hours using Relevance AI and deploy within a day or two. But there are some major limitations, which I'll touch on in part 3. First though, let's jump in and have a look at the platform. So the first thing I'd recommend doing when you jump into the platform is going to the template page and cloning one of these agent templates. You can then look under the hood at how the agent is built, which is going to provide a bit of a demo, bit more context for how to use different features and what everything means. It's a little bit confusing if you kind of jump in and there's just like everything is blank and you have to work everything out at once. So I'm going to go ahead here and let's clone Scott's blog writing agent. So I'm just going to clone it onto our account. This is going to take us to the agent chat UI. I'm not going to trigger it here. I'm first going to show how this agent is built. So there are 4 things to kind of emphasize here: core instructions, the flow builder, tools, and subagents. Don't need to worry about the other areas at this stage. So core instructions. This is where we tell our agent what it's trying to do. Sometimes we want to be very detailed here. Sometimes we can afford to be a little bit more concise, as is the case here, because perhaps we've given this agent a bit more structure and direction, either in the flow builder or via a tool. Sometimes you'll see, like, if the agent, for example, doesn't have any tools, doesn't have any flow, like sometimes this can be incredibly detailed. But essentially this is just telling the agent, like, this is what we want you to do. That's kind of it. Next, we have the flow builder. So this is if you have an agent that, so as you can see here, there's nothing here because we're relying quite heavily on the core instructions. And I think there will probably be a tool attached to this agent. But sometimes you'll see, particularly if you've got kind of lots of if statements and conditions that you want your agent to take into account, you'll see this kind of built out in quite a lot of detail. I like to use the flow builder in situations where I want to make sure the agent captures certain pieces of information before then using tools. So an example of that might be, let's say we want to go away and search a database. I might know that I need to get 6 pieces of information from the user in order to bring back a good result. So I might say, create like an instruction like this, ask the user for X, and then I might then create another instruction saying, trigger the tool Y. That's a use case where, for example, you could rely on that as an instruction, but the flow builder kind of just forces the agent to think of that a little bit more sequentially. Next, we have tools. Now, tools is a huge area, and we'll spend a little bit more time talking about tools in part 2 when we go through the examples, because there's quite a lot to unpack. But at this point, what's worth knowing is tools are essentially the capabilities that we give agents for them to take actions outside of Relevance AI. So that might be running a Google search, it might be interacting with a database we run, it might be scraping websites. A really kind of cool thing in Relevance AI is there's a ton of pre-built tools that you can sort of pick up and run with. So you can sort of see here, we've got like a bunch of examples. A lot of them are pretty niche, to be fair, but there are some that are incredibly useful. And when we, later on in this video, when we look at building our own tools, you'll kind of see like just how much potential there is to do some interesting stuff. And lastly, subagents. This for me is the thing that sets Relevance AI apart from so many other tools, because it makes it so incredibly easy to build multi-agent teams. Like you can just click here and say, allow this agent to interact with, it's a bit of a random example, but a toddler schedule plan, where to live. These agents that I've built, but you can start to kind of see how you could build out a multi-agent team. A lot of other tools in this space make it really easy to build AI agents, but when it comes to building a team of agents that work together to solve a problem, it starts to kind of get a little bit messy. and a little bit more complicated. And I just find the UI for doing this in Relevance AI is incredibly easy. And each of these agents has its own core instructions, its own flow builder, its own tools that allow it to kind of go off and achieve its objective. And they all can work together as a team to deliver the overall objective. So that's the main things. There are a few other things I think worth covering at this point. Firstly, integrations. Secondly, the deployment options. And then lastly, we're going to just touch on the LLM models that are available. So for integrations, I'm just going to jump over to tools quickly because we can see that in a little bit more detail. So if I build a new tool, just go here and we're going to add a step. This is probably the best place to kind of get a bit of a sense of the integrations we have. So I'm just going to show this just so you can kind of see on screen some of the options we've got. 11 Lads, HeyGem. There's a really kind of strong emphasis on text to image, text to audio, text to video, which kind of makes sense. Got lots of kind of data munging stuff, API calls to Hugging Face, HubSpot, Salesforce, Apollo, LinkedIn, Google Calendar, etc. So you can kind of get a bit of a sense of the integrations. So in my opinion, this is not necessarily a strong area of Relevance AI. There are some really good integrations here. And from my understanding of conversations in the Discord group that Relevance AI run, there's going to be a lot more integrations coming. But compared to other platforms in this space, the range of integrations offered by Relevance AI is relatively limited. So this is something that I just recommend before you kind of get started, just ensuring it has the relevant integrations that you need. One kind of nice catch-all is Relevance AI does integrate with Zapier. It's also got its own API. So if there are things that kind of fall between the gaps, you might be able to integrate it via Zapier or the API. For example, I wanted to integrate Notion and just did it via Zapier, which was fine. So that's where we are on the integrations. There are also 9 integrations you can use to trigger your agents. So if we go into, let's go back into this agent, you can see here we've got triggers. So we can, for example, say when I get a certain email in Gmail, I want to run this agent. Or when I get a message on WhatsApp for Business, I want that to run my agent. So there's both trigger integrations and then integrations of where we can send data from our agent. Next, let's talk about deployment options. So again, this is something that is not the strongest area of Relevance AI. Once you've built an agent, you can click up here to share. And you can see we get a URL, which is just a public URL. And then if we toggle this on, we get an iframe embed link. So you can, of course, copy and paste this into a website that you run and have a kind of a public facing version of your agent. The downside is it's an iframe, so we can't customize the look and feel. We can't really change. It's essentially going to look like this panel here. So for me, like that was a little bit of a downside with Relevance AI. I can't easily build public-facing products using this tool. I can build kind of prototypes and internal tools quite easily. Again, I believe this is something that will likely change over time, but at this stage, it's a bit of a limitation. Lastly, I mentioned LLM models. So if we just go back into this agent and let's go here. So in the advanced settings, you can see the language model that this agent is using. So we've got, I think, about 14 different options. They're all kind of either OpenAI or the Anthropic ones. So we've got a pretty good range of models we can use. Again, it's not the largest offering of agent platforms out there, but generally speaking, like we've got the big ones, and in every kind of situation I've built agents with on this platform, like I've not had any issues with that. So those are the main features of the platform. If there's anything that I've missed or is still unclear, please drop a comment below, because if you're wondering it, other people probably are too. With that said, we're going to jump in and build our first agent. So we're going to walk through how you might go about building a really simple multi-agent system for planning travel. This is something I've pre-built, so I've got all my content over here so I can copy and paste it. You don't need to watch me type. And there are a few pre-built elements we'll be using. I'll explain as we go. But first of all, we're going to click create a new agent. We'll give it name travel agent AI. This is a travel agent specializing in travel for parents of young children. So we're just going to give it this is more for our benefit. And then we're going to give it some core instructions. And there are two things of note here. First is that we're giving this agent a goal. The goal is to help the user get a trip booked. This is important because every user of this agent is going to kind of be at different stages. Like someone might know the dates they want to travel and the specific town or area they want to be, whereas someone might just know that they want to get some beach time next. Because of that, we want to be able to cater to those different inputs, those different kind of triggers, and help the user get to the same endpoint. If everyone using this agent had the exact same kind of type of information to start with, we wouldn't need to rely so much on core instructions. We could just kind of have a very structured tool. But in this case, with travel, like everyone's going to be at a different starting point. So that's why we're giving it a very kind of clear goal, so that for one user, it might need to ask 10 questions. For another user, it might only need to ask 2 or 3. The second thing to note is that we're then giving it a sequence of things it needs to work out. So it needs to first help the user understand or work out the destination or the hotel. It then needs to work out flights. It then needs to work out kind of any requests and booking the room, etc. So before we jump into the flow builder, I'm just going to give this agent some tools. So it's definitely going to have to run Google searches. I've pre-built a tool for scraping hotel websites. There is actually one already here, which is extract content from websites. So we'll give it access to that as well. And then lastly, I've pre-built a tool, which I'll spend a bit of time walking through, called Travel Destination Finder for Parents. Before I jump into that, just a quick thing here. You'll see that there's an exclamation mark next to all these tools. So with every tool, you can determine whether you want the agent to ask for permission to run that tool, or whether you're happy for it to auto-approve. This is quite important because, for example, if we gave the agent a tool that allowed them to send emails, we may not just want our kind of like, while we're testing it, for our agent to just be able to like send out hundreds of emails to people we don't know. So in that situation, like you might want it to ask for approval. In this case, I'm happy for it to auto run. It is going to use up some of my credits, so it's worth kind of being aware of that. But I'm not too concerned about that at the moment. So I'm just going to let this auto run just so it kind of doesn't kind of get in the way so much. So I just want to explain a little bit about the travel destination for Finder. So we just jump over here. We can see we've got a custom built tool. So there are 4 kind of parts to tools in Relevance AI. We've got knowledge, inputs, LLM calls, and then the output. So in this case, basically, you could think of this almost like a form. We basically got a bunch of inputs that we want to try and capture from the user. So our agent is going to try and understand this information and pass it to the tool. So we want to know, for example, the departure airport, the destination or the type of trip that the user wants to go on, the check-in date, the duration of the holiday, the age of children, how many children they have, the budget. This is almost kind of like if you went into a travel agent, what are the questions that the agent is going to want to ask of you to be able to book a trip? So we're kind of creating inputs for all of those bits of information. And as I say, because we're going to give our agent access to this tool, the agent is essentially going to ask questions to pre-fill or identify all these inputs. So those inputs, we're then going to feed into an LLM prompt. So we're using OpenAI GPT-4o, and you can see here that we basically just built that prompt, and then we're using variables to pass this information. So we're saying we're looking to travel to destination between check-in date and checkout. We'll have X number of children, age of children. We're looking to travel for up to X days from departure airport and with a budget, etc., etc. So this is passing it to OpenAI, which is obviously going to return a result. And then that result is then going to get passed back to our agent. Now, one other thing just to kind of touch on while we're here is we can also give tools knowledge. So perhaps, let's say we've got a database of hundreds of hotels that have been ranked really well for holidays for families with young children. We might want to feed that database as a knowledge for this tool. So you could do that by scraping. Like here, we've kind of got a few articles that we've taken some hotels that are well ranked, and we're passing it to this tool so that when we run this prompt, we can give it this knowledge, and that's going to help improve the quality of the prompt. So that's sort of that. I wanted to kind of explain that first because when we build the flow builder, we're going to reference a few of those tools. So although it seems like we've skipped a step, it kind of makes sense to set up the tools before we do the flow builder. So we've got our agent, we've given it a goal and instructions, we've given it access to some tools that we know what these tools do. We're now going to add a kind of a sequence and tell our agent what to do in what order. So the first step, we're going to give our agent the instruction that it's going to ask the user for their budget, dates they're looking to travel, and whether any locations come to mind. So this now has a bit of context, right? I remember when we were looking at the travel destination tool, it had those inputs. So the agent is going to start trying to pre-fill some of that information. Then it's going to pass that to our tool, which is going to give us some options. So I'm going to create an instruction saying, once 5 options have been presented, ask the user whether any of these are suitable. We'll then create a condition that says, if the user says one of them is acceptable, then use Flight Time Finley, which is another agent that I've built to go off and look at flight times to find some suitable flights for this trip. Also get the hotel website scraper to find an email address of the hotel. So that was the hotel scraper tool that we had earlier as well. So once the flight time agent comes back with some flights, we're going to suggest 4 options for flights for the trip ranked best to worst. And then lastly, what's going on there? Lastly, we're going to add a final instruction, ask the user whether they'd like to email the hotel to confirm they have babysitting services and a cot, show the hotel's email address and draft an email. So we should be pretty much good to go. We've given agent some basic details, core instructions, it's got a flow, given it access to tools, we've set it all to auto run. Lastly, we need to give it access to Subagents. So because we referenced Flight Time Finley, we're going to just give it access to that agent as well. So I'm going to click confirm and continue. And we should now be able to test out our agent. I'm just going to say, I'm looking to travel to Mexico in May 2025. Okay, so our travel agent is working. So it should come back and have a couple of questions that it needs to fill out that tool that we built. So what is your budget for the trip? Let's say £4,000, one child who is 2.5 years old. How long do you plan to stay in Mexico? 3 weeks. It's completely made up. Do you have a specific destination in mind? Say Playa del Carmen. 5, what type of accommodation? Family friendly resort. 6, do you have specific dates? Not yet. Okay, so we'll send that off. That should now hopefully run our tool. Okay, so it's come back asking for a question. Before I proceed, could you please provide me with a rough idea of your check-in? Okay, so let's say 2nd of May, check-in to 3 weeks, let's say 21st of May. Let's try that. So hopefully this now runs our tool, which will run that LLM prompt. Yep, so we can see that's running in the background. So it's using our tool. And that should now return an option. I believe we had an instruction that said come back with 5 options. So let's see if we get that. So that's complete. Okay, so it's come back with 5 options. 5 beaches, hotel, blah, blah, blah. So it's nice. Okay, so if we pick one of these, let's just say, okay, so if we pick one of these, let's say the option 2 looks great. Option 2. Now it should now pass us over to the flight time sub agent, which should go off and find some flights for us to Mexico. So it's kind of interesting, like seeing what the agent sent to another agent. Here you go. Find suitable flights for a family trip from UK to Gran Velas, Riviera Maya, Playa del Carmen. Checking in. Cool. So this is now running some Google searches. We'll wait for that to come back. Okay, so BA, Virgin, TUI. So let's go ahead with BA. Now it should run the hotel scraper. So this is trying to find the email address on that hotel's website of an email address we can contact to then write an email to the hotel, see if they have babysitting services or if they can make sure that they have a cot. Very important if you have young kids. So let's see if that's going to work. Oh, okay. So in this case, it didn't work, which means probably either that the hotel doesn't have an email address on their website. Oh no. Okay, so it has found it, just hasn't scraped it. So in this case, I'd probably double check that that's actually correct and it's not made that up, but it's written an email and hopefully found the email address. So next we're going to have a go at building a financial advisor agent that does cash flow modeling. So basically takes your income, your expenses, any assets you have, and kind of extrapolate and forecast the value over time. So this is something that we know can be done because financial advisors do this all the time. It's based on data and a set of assumptions. The reason I wanted to share this as an example is I've really struggled to get it working in Relevance AI. I've tried building it where it just has core instructions. I've tried building it with a flow. I've tried it being a tool, and each one's kind of had its own challenges. So partly I wanted to share this just to show some of the limitations, but also like if you have any ideas of how you might go about building this in a way that would understand some of those nuances better, like I'd love to hear how you'd approach it. So I'm going to keep this one quite simple, just with nothing but core instructions to give this agent the maximum amount of flexibility to come back and ask me more questions. Where I found this struggle in the past as a flow or a tool is it becomes too structured and it doesn't ask additional questions when it really should. So we're just going to give it just some core instructions. As you can see, these are incredibly detailed. The reason for that is really to help the agent understand the bigger picture. One of the key things that we've got going on here is we've given this agent 3 different steps. First, this agent needs to understand where the user currently is, what age are they, what investments do they have, anything that would affect their kind of point A. Then in order to extrapolate kind of the future and how their portfolio might change, we need to really understand 2 things in detail. We need to understand cash inflows, like what is their income? How might that change over time? Does their portfolio generate any income? And lastly, we need to understand outflows. How much are they spending per year? Are there any expensive events in the future, etc. So if we get those 3 things right and we understand them in enough detail, we should be able to create a reasonably good model. So I'm just going to confirm that and we can get this running. So I really need to get better at setting welcome messages for my agents. I end up just like triggering them by saying, hey, you can, if I just go in here, I'll just show you that quickly. In advanced settings down here, you can give your agent a welcome message, which just then prompts, basically just shows like the thing the agent would prompt. So here we go, what's your current age? Obviously for this one, I'm gonna enter completely made up data, otherwise that would be incredibly silly. So I'm gonna say I am 52 years old. I have a house and $400,000 of Vanguard VTI funds. No, I don't have an emergency fund. My net worth is $500,000 and it is 80% liquid and fully invested. Cool. Let's see what happens. Okay, interesting. So it thinks at this point it's understood point A because it's moving straight on to understanding the cash inflows. So earned income, let's say $80,000 a year. Does your portfolio produce any income? If so, how much do you receive? So let's say the property gets a 5% yield and the VTI funds, I don't know, 3%. Will these income sources increase with inflation? Yes, with inflation. What rate? I don't know, 3%? Let's model that. So presumably now it's going to go on to the outflows. Cool, okay, so it's summarized that. What tax jurisdiction are you in? Let's say UK. Taxes do you anticipate paying? Income tax and let's say corporation tax on a company owns the property. 3, are there any planned lifestyle changes? Let's say I will be getting married. Okay, cool. Next year, yeah, that's fine. Current monthly living expenses, let's say $5,000. Do you have any known life events? I plan to buy 3 more properties, each costing 400,000. I realize I've told it the UK and I'm using dollars, so hopefully that doesn't confuse it. Let's see what it does. Okay, cool. So it looks like it thinks it's understood everything. It's summarized it. Okay, no, it's got a couple of questions. So what is the current value of your house? Let's say 400,000. How do you plan to finance the purchase? Say mortgage at 25% deposit and 5% mortgage rate. 1 per 5 years. Do you anticipate any changes in your living expenses after getting married? Yes, it will double. So if this worked well, it would be really interesting to then have this agent work with kind of like a investment advisory agent. You could basically build out a multi-agent team for like full kind of financial planning. Okay, so it's come back with even more questions. So how long do you plan to work for retiring? Let's say until I am 70. Do you have any other sources of income or expenses we haven't? That's a really good question. I'm kind of glad it's come back with that, because in the past when I've tried to build this, it's kind of just made a bunch of assumptions and run the model before knowing about something else. So that's a good question. Would you like to include any specific goals for your portfolio? Let's say I would like to draw 4% a year. Okay. Yeah, so when I've tried to build this previously and run it, the challenge I've found is when it's been built with a flow builder or as a tool, it kind of becomes a little bit too rigid and just starts to miss a lot of really crucial information. So I think this actually seems so like this is better, just having the instructions just in the core instructions and not kind of having too much else going on. It gives the agent a bit more flexibility to do this kind of back and forward. And now it's come back with the data table and the model. So this is kind of interesting. The downside that I'm kind of seeing here is if, for example, this was a tool, we could take very structured data and we could tell the prompt precisely how we want this table, for example, to come back. Whereas this kind of seems like if I ran this 3 or 4 times, this would come back a little bit different each time, which has its benefits. It takes into account what the user wants in a bit more detail, but it does just mean that the quality of it is going to be a bit sporadic. But generally, we can see this has done a reasonably good job, I think, of taking what we've mentioned into account. And I presume that anything that is kind of not great about this or inaccurate is going to come down to anything that we missed in the core instructions that we could sort of go back and adjust and refine. So let's just kind of note a few things that we mentioned. I mentioned that we wanted to take 4% per year and retire at 70. So it looks like it's done that. We can see after age 70, top of my head, that looks like about 4% of that portfolio value. And looks like maybe it's allocated the property purchases in the wrong place. So I guess this is just the classic kind of challenge of LLM prompts, and perhaps changing the LLM model would solve this if we kind of use something a little bit more intelligent rather than kind of optimized token price or speed. So it might take a little bit of adjusting, but in general this looks okay, just not highly reliable. But yeah, kind of I wanted to put this one out there just as a bit of a like, this one doesn't feel quite right yet, and I sort of struggled with a few different variations to sort of find a good approach. So any ideas on how you would kind of improve this, yeah, would be great to hear. But yeah, just a kind of another example. So in the next section, we're going to take a look in a bit more detail at pricing, some more limitations of the platform and how it compares against other alternative agent building platforms. So when it comes to pricing, Relevance AI are pretty reasonable. They've got a free plan that you can use that has a limit of 100 credits a day. That's not a huge amount. To put that into context, the travel agent that we built earlier, each time we run that was using about 100 to 150 credits. So you will get through this quite quickly. But what this means is that when you sign up, you don't have to pop a card in, you don't have to worry about being charged before you've built anything that you're actively using. But I would set the expectation as soon as you have an agent that you're kind of actively using or having other people use, you're almost certainly going to need to jump up to the next tier. Now, on their website, the pricing jumps from 0 to $199 a month. But if you're in the platform, as I say, I don't know if this is going away or if this is sort of intentional or not, but there is a plan in between these, which is the Pro plan, which is $19 per month. As of time of recording this video, as I say, this might change. I suspect there will always be something in between here though, because between the free plan, which is 100 credits per day, up to the next one, which is 100,000 credits, that's quite a leap. And so the Pro plan is quite nice if you're kind of playing around, or maybe I'm building sort of like 5 to 10 agents that are relatively straightforward. 10,000 credits is a reasonably decent quota. Now, as you can see, as you go up the tiers, a couple of things change. Obviously, the credits that you have increase, the number of users that can access the accounts if you're running an AI agency. Perhaps you've got clients, that's going to increase. And then the amount of knowledge that you feed into your tools increases. I have not come anywhere near exceeding kind of knowledge. I imagine it would be the credit thing would be most likely in most situations to be the thing that is going to determine if you need to jump up to the next level or not. Now, in general, in compared to other tools, so things like BotPress, Diffie, Zapier Central, like other kind of no-code AI agent builders, this feels pretty reasonable to me. There's nothing here that kind of makes me think this is significantly overpriced or underpriced. It's all kind of pretty comparable to other tools. Now, I do want to touch on limitations. So there's two things in particular that we've kind of touched on briefly already, but I think they are kind of the two main areas of Relevance AI that are kind of have their limitations. So the first one we touched on earlier is the integrations. At the moment, it feels to me like the integrations that are kind of on offer are quite sort of developer focused, and there are some good ones in there, but it's a little bit random. There's a lot of things that are missing that I'd expect. Like there's no Google Sheets integration, there's no Notion integration, no Todoist, none. Like a lot of things that I'd sort of expect might be sort of within those 10 integrations you might build aren't there. So that's definitely a limitation, but one that I expect maybe 6-12 months from this video going live will probably be less of an issue, but definitely something I would be considering. The other limitation with Relevance AI that may or may not make this a deal breaker, something we touched on earlier, which is the embed options. So when you have an agent, this is essentially the only UI option that you have. You can embed it, as we kind of mentioned earlier, and we can embed it as an iframe, but that's it. There's no customization options. You can, I believe, work with the API to obviously trigger the agent and potentially catch the payload and display that in a different way. But compared to some of the other agent tools that I've used, the options for doing that kind of easily, like I kind of expect maybe here to have a few more options to embed this in line and adjust things like CSS or how it's going to visually appear, but none of that is kind of an option. So for me, those are the two main reasons why I might consider to use a different tool. But besides that, in general, this is a brilliant bit of kit. Like I think if you're looking to build prototypes of agents, build multi-agent systems, and you want it to take hours rather than days or weeks, this is a really, really good tool to be using. And the sort of power is largely going to come down from the brief and how you approach building these. It really is one of those kind of what you put in, you get out with this tool. And I think it's a really incredible bit of kit. In terms of who I'd recommend it for, I'd say particularly if you're an AI agency or running a consultancy, this is a great tool because the speed at which you can kind of build AI agents and agent systems for clients, you're going to find it pretty tough, I think, to find another tool that is just as powerful, that's also no code and as easy to use, and kind of speed of building these tools is kind of just as rapid. I haven't come across anything that's kind of got those three things quite as right as Relevance AI. But I'd say where I'd kind of consider different tools would be if I need to have a lot of flexibility over the embed options, or if I need something a lot more kind of powerful and flexible, then I might turn more to some framework, something like Flowise or something like LangChain. But the compromise there is my development time. While my deployment options are going to kind of open up, the time it's going to take to develop a agent is going to increase massively because I'm not kind of using this kind of no code interface. So if you want to try out the platform, I'll drop a link in the description below. And if you're interested in the agent space, please do subscribe to the channel where I'll share tips and tutorials on building agents, such as this one where I built a coaching agent that looks at my daily journal, critiques my thinking, and then sends me an email.